Hello everybody, Maven here, and Act 2 of episode Revenant has launched this week, and with it comes a handful of sandbox changes, one of which being to the Raiden Flux exotic hunter chest. And I don't know about you, but I always felt that Raiden Flux was one of the most slept on exotics in the entire game. Raiden Flux arc staff is actually very strong, but this week it got juiced up quite a bit, and the patch notes are as follows. You gain 20% bonus arc staff damage per hit, up from 14%, and the max ceiling damage buff you can get with Raiden Flux is 70%, up from 50%. Now Maven, why are you making an entire video on a 20% damage buff to a roaming super? Because it goes a little bit further than that. Bungie also announced that all roaming supers are going to do somewhere between 30 to 55% more bonus damage against champions. And that just opens up this exotic for champion-based content because it absolutely shreds them, because this 30 to 55% stacks on top of the extra 20% that the Raiden Flux got alone. And I don't know if you ever use this exotic, but it makes the arc staff seemingly last forever. It's actually really good, so don't sleep on this thing. So I made a build for it, and let's break it down. Hope you enjoy. This video is sponsored by Advanced GG, the only clinically proven gaming supplement shown to improve your gaming performance. Use code MAVEN at checkout for 10% off your order, but until November 25th, we have a special code MAVEN30 for 30% off your order. Link down below. Thank you. So let's start by reading the Raiden Flux. Quick successive attacks with arc staff increase its damage output and duration, stacks up to 3 times for a 70% damage buff. I did pre and post damage testing against Phyrizia, the ogre boss of Grasp of Avarice, and I'll show you my findings. First of all, if you take a look at what I'm doing to Phyrizia, I am stun locking her. Now this is what I've always called a hidden perk of arc staff, the ability to stun lock bosses. And this is the main reason that I feel that Raiden Flux is an underrated DPS strategy. Now obviously not every boss can be stun locked, like Riven for example, but a pretty solid amount of them can be. You'd be surprised at how many bosses are vulnerable to it. Anyways, we end up with over 900,000 damage, and I did the same thing post buff, and you can see that our heavy punches at the end of our light heavy combo are doing 115,000, whereas before the buff they were doing 97,000, so that's nice. And we end up with over 1 million damage. And it's supposed to be a 20% buff, but this is about 17%, so Bungie, you might need to check your buff because I'm pretty sure these damage phases were identical. But what if I added Anarchy to the mix along with the artifact mod Concussive Reload so we can apply a debuff? This is realistically what you would do if you use the Raiden Flux for a DPS phase. The Anarchy is just constantly ticking for damage, reapplying that debuff and proccing kinetic impacts while you use your arc staff. And suddenly our heavy punches are hitting really hard for 152,000 damage apiece, and our grand total is over 1.6 million, which is actually very good for a roaming super. It ain't no glacial quake, but it's something. And comparing that to an actual DPS strat, something you would normally use if you were actually trying to cook, we're on Warlock and replacing a well, and we got an Envious Arsenal GL, a Choir of One, and another Envious Arsenal GL. This is like some of the most optimal DPS you can do in the game right now. And not gonna lie, it absolutely fries. And I even could have squeezed out another clip of GL at the end if I knew the DPS phase was about to end, and our grand total was over 3.1 million. But then again, this was a full damage phase. With Raiden Flux, we just did a half damage phase just to test the super. So if we see that again with a side-by-side comparison, and don't mind me, I'm stupid and I started the timer 2 seconds early, but you can see that our DPS time on the Raiden Flux was more or less exactly half of the time on the other DPS phase, and I made sure to stop the time on exactly the frame that DPS ended. And remember, with Raiden Flux we did 1.6 million damage, and with the GLs, we did 3.1 million. So according to that timer, the DPS output checks out. So the Raiden Flux with Anarchy is really nothing to scoff at when it comes to damage output. And pairing that with the fact that it stun locks a lot of bosses in the game, it's actually pretty dang viable, and more situations than people give it credit for. And for the quick traditional Carl damage test, we absolutely nuke him with a simple 3-hit combo, which is absolutely mind-blowing. That heavy punch alone did over 250,000 damage, which is absurd. And to compare that to a rocket launcher, yeah, I think the Raiden Flux is hitting pretty dang hard if I do say so myself. But moving on, remember that roaming supers got a 30 to 55% damage buff against champions, and they didn't specify which supers received which buff, and unfortunately I didn't do pre-buff damage testing for champions, so we're just gonna have to eyeball it. And when I was testing against champions, I noticed something really strange. So first of all, it does stun unstoppable champions with the heavy punch attack, and I don't know why. And what's weirder is you can see here that it didn't stun this champion on my first heavy punch, but it did it on the second punch. Nothing in Arc Staff's description says it does anything to stun unstops. I was thinking that maybe it has something to do with lethal current, which says that meleeing jolted targets blinds them, and blinding does stun unstops, but I tested this theory and your Arc Staff doesn't actually jolt. Otherwise it would stun overloads, but as you can see here, you can't stun overloads with Arc Staff. Now I had another theory that Arc Staff counts as a melee, so therefore dodging would apply jolts with lethal current, but it doesn't. My final theory, which is the most likely one, is that the heavy punch attack is actually a disorienting blow by default, which is the other hunter melee ability that blinds and does indeed stun unstops. But if that's the case, then there's no reason why I should have failed to stun this unstop here the first time I punched it. But it doesn't stop there, it gets even weirder when we get to barrier champions. Take a look at this clip here where I wail on this barrier champion and nothing happens, but just like the unstop, the second time around, I broke right through that barrier for no apparent reason. Didn't even say that I stunned a barrier champion. Now this doesn't always happen, it's more consistent than not, but this can happen from time to time. I think it might just be lag, like the game trying to catch up with your damage, but anyways, in the background gameplay, I'll show you some clips from the GMs I did. I did GM Birthplace of the Vile and GM Arms Dealer. And when I did Arms Dealer, a random blueberry from LFG joined, and he just so happened to have the Raiden Flux too, because he knows about the secret sauce. The Raiden Flux absolutely nukes champions and it lasts very long, so it can help you clear out entire sections. It shreds everything a GM wants to throw at you. It's just a matter of getting your super and surviving. But also note that Bungie did buff the regen rate massively on roaming supers. This is a quote from the patch as well. As a reference, if you were using between 3 and 5 Nova Bombs while playing an advanced Nightfall, you can now charge around 6 or 8 Nova Warp activations in the same activity. So roaming supers now charge faster than one and done supers, which is great for ad clear potential. That's a huge game changer for exotics based around roaming supers, such as Raiden Flux. It's awesome, but you might notice something off about this exotic as compared to other exotics based around roaming supers. It doesn't have a neutral game perk. This exotic is purely super based. Therefore, in my honest opinion, the optimal way to actually use this exotic is to not use this exotic. I know that sounds strange, but you're gonna want to use a better arc build in the meanwhile while you build your super, and then swap off to Raiden Flux when you want to actually pop your super. I mainly opted against this in the background gameplay just for the ease of use and because I did some GMs and the loadout was locked and I literally couldn't swap. But in my opinion, and it really isn't an opinion, it's a fact, the strongest neutral game Arc Hunter build is with Assassin's Cal. Because you know what Arc Hunter does. You use Combination Blow and Gambler's Dodge, which both chain into each other forever. Combination Blow fully restores dodge energy and Gambler's Dodge fully restores melee energy. So you just go back and forth dodging, punching forever. And the Assassin's Cal is making you invis and fully restoring your health every time you melee something. So it's extremely good for survivability and also super energy when paired along with heavy-handed and hands-on. So I have 3 loadouts here today, and I have a Raiden Flux build that's meant to be used solely on its own, which is the one that I prefer and have been using and enjoying. But more optimally, you should start on the Assassin's Cal build and swap off to this Raiden Flux build to pop your super. So here's a quick breakdown of the Assassin's Cal build. Here's the subclass screen if you want to screenshot it. And the idea with the mods is just to get a ton of super energy via double hands-on and dynamo, since we're always dodging their targets for Gambler's Dodge. And we're making tons of orbs with triple heavy-handed, and every time we dodge, we're scooping up these orbs quickly with powerful attraction on the class item. So that's the main idea, and then when we want to pop our arc staff, we just go over here and click this, and then this one's mod setup is meant strictly just for like the DPS phase or ad clear alone, because we're going to swap off of it immediately after. So we got double power preservation to make tons of potent orbs for our teammates because we're stacking 2 copies, and then we got radiant light to give them some armor charge. And then we got triple surges you can swap out accordingly to whatever GL you're using, but this is the Raiden Flux build that I have been using, and honestly this is the one I prefer. This one isn't meant for any build swapping, this one you're just meant to stay on, so it's more or less a hybrid of the other two builds that I just showed you. So we have kind of the same makeup as the Assassin's Cowl build, just with double kinetic weapons surge to pair along with our Bad Juju, which has been extremely excellent for charging our super quickly. Every time I use this thing, I'm always super impressed with it, no pun intended. It got a massive buff recently, so String of Curses lasts a whopping 7.5 seconds now, and it's so easy to keep it up. And the more stacks you have, the more super energy it grants. And when you have 5 stacks of it, you get a 52% damage buff on top of the 17% we get from our 2 surges. So this thing hits really effing hard, and it's extremely efficient because Final Blows fully reload the mag, so you can just shred through mobs. And Bungie also gave it a hidden perk so that it will cause these cursed thrall-like explosions every now and then, which really helps with group ad clear. So this weapon is just incredible and easily in the A tier. And with my main non-swap Raiden Flux build, I originally expected to do the dodge punch combination blow thing for the most part with lethal current, but I actually found myself almost never doing that, and I find myself just using the Bad Juju 90% of the time because it's that good. I've been able to get my super back in less than a minute very consistently. And on this hybrid build version, I still have my 1 copy of Power Preservation on my helmet, and this mod is actually insane for roaming supers. And if you ever run a roaming super and do a fire team based activity, you should run a copy of this, trust me. And it gets even more insane with Spark of Amplitude, which makes an orb when we get rapid final blows while amplified. So I want to show you a clip real quick and pay attention to just how many orbs we make. It gets a little stupid. I counted 25 orbs, and these are no baby orbs. They're from your super, so they're legit potent orbs. And popping a Raiden Flux is basically guaranteed to give your teammates enough orbs to get their super. Then they pop, you pick up their orbs, you top off your super, and then you rinse and repeat. You change supers back and forth. The orb generation is just absurd. And I just wanted to show you the end screen from that GM Birthplace of the Vile run I did, and just look. Look at how many orbs of power I made. 168 orbs of power, which is 8 times more than the next guy. And look at the kills, 264 compared to their 70s. This is because I was able to get my super back real fast between Bad Juju, Kinetic Siphon, and Spark of Amplitude, and I was able to pop tons of supers and go on a rampage and kill everything. And yes, one of them was a Titan, and you know how hard it is to keep up with Titans and GMs, so if you're wondering if this is viable, I think this speaks for itself. Now, I think I demonstrated everything I needed to demonstrate in this video, so let's quickly break down the rest of the build. So for our subclass, I kept Lethal Current and Combination Blow, although this isn't absolutely required. You can run Ascension or Tempest Strike if you wish, because you're going to be using your Bad Juju most of the time anyway, so I don't think it really matters much. And for our fragments, we got Shock, Resistance, Amplitude, and Ions, and by the way, Lethal Current states that meleeing a jolted target blinds them, which ties into the new artifact mod that just came out on Tuesday called Arc Compounding, which buffs your damage to blind targets, so it works well with Lethal Current. I don't know how much damage this gives, but if you know, let me know in the comments. Now for the rest of our mods that I didn't already go over earlier, we got double heavy-handed and impact induction on the gloves. Now I have this set up because I honestly expected to melee spam more than I actually do, but I don't. So I would say the glove mods are really flexible. You can run whatever you want. On our chest, we just got various resists you can swap out accordingly depending on the threat modifier. On the boots, we got recuperation just to help slightly with our survivability. And on the class item, we got powerful attraction, Reaper for more orbs, and time dilation to make our surges last longer. For our stats, I opted for double hundreds in resilience and discipline, maintain that tier 3 intellect soft cap, and dump the rest into mobility because the other stats don't matter. And for our loadout, this is generally what I like to run. I have a 1-2 punch auto-loading shoddy just to pair with combination blow, but sometimes I've run an auto-loading waveframe GL like the Martyr's Retribution. The special slot is extremely flexible, and you can run whichever special you want, really. And then just run your best DPS GL in the heavy slot. I recommend the one from Banshee. Go pick it up right now if you haven't already. And that about does it for the build. Is this the best build in the world? No, but it has its place. I know it's niche, but whatever that niche happens to be, it does it very well. Seriously, don't sleep on this thing. It puts out hard. I just wish Bungie would give it one more buff to give it some neutral game. That's all I'm asking for. I don't care what that one thing is, but it just needs to do something passively outside of your super. Maybe defeating a blind target gives you bonus super, I don't know. Just give us something. And one last little thing I wanted to mention about arc staff is to learn the momentum of it, and I'll show you what I mean. You'll often pop your super midair and have the high ground, so I'm just letting you know that the heavy attack launches you much further forward than you would anticipate. It has more forward momentum than it seems, so get used to it if you pop your super from high up. But alas, as always, the dim loadout link for this build will be down below in the description, and also the pinned comment if you'd like to give it a try. And if you got any buddies who are hunter mains, I'd appreciate if you share the video with them. Maybe this is something they might want to try out. And that's gonna do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, be sure to hit the like button and maybe the subscribe button if you are new. Would love to have you here for more Destiny content on the way. And remember to check out our sponsor, Advanced GG, in the link down below. Code Maven at checkout for 10% off, or Maven30 if you're watching this before November 25th. And with that, I'll catch you in the next video. See you later.